The morning sun cast long shadows across the rolling hills of Norfolk as Prince William stepped out of his Land Rover, his boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. Beside him, Catherine adjusted her wool coat against the crisp October air, her eyes bright with anticipation. They had come to Holcombe Estate not as royals making an official visit, but as passionate advocates ready to get their hands dirty in the soil that would help shape the future of British agriculture. Tom Bradshaw, a third-generation farmer whose weathered hands told the story of decades spent working the land, approached them with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. He had been selected to participate in a groundbreaking, sustainable farming initiative that the royal couple had been quietly developing for months. What made this project different was that William and Catherine weren't just lending their names to it, they were rolling up their sleeves and learning alongside the farmers. "Your Royal Highnesses," Tom began, but William quickly interrupted with a warm smile. "Please, just call me William today. We're here to learn from you, not the other way around." Catherine nodded in agreement, pulling on a pair of gardening gloves she had brought from home. "We want to understand what really works on the ground, not just what looks good in reports." The trio walked toward a section of farmland that had been struggling with soil degradation and declining crop yields. Traditional farming methods had left the earth depleted, and Tom was facing the same challenges that thousands of farmers across Britain were grappling with. Rising costs, unpredictable weather patterns, and pressure to maintain productivity had created a perfect storm of difficulties. As they reached the experimental plots, William knelt down and picked up a handful of soil from the conventional farming area. It crumbled through his fingers like dry powder, lacking the rich, dark quality of healthy earth. In contrast, the soil from the regenerative farming plot felt different. It held together better, had a deeper color, and seemed to teem with life. "The difference is remarkable," Catherine observed, examining the two soil samples side by side. "You can actually see how one supports life while the other struggles." Dr. Sarah Mitchell, an agricultural scientist who had been working with the project, joined them to explain the transformation taking place. She had spent years researching sustainable farming methods and was thrilled to have royal backing for her work. "What we're seeing here is the result of cover cropping, reduced tillage, and integrated pest management," Dr. Mitchell explained as they walked through the test plots. "Instead of fighting against nature, we're working with it." William listened intently as she described how certain plants could naturally fix nitrogen in the soil, reducing the need for chemical fertilizers. Catherine was particularly interested in the crop rotation strategies that not only improved soil health, but also created habitats for wildlife. "The beauty of this approach," Dr. Mitchell continued, "is that it addresses multiple challenges simultaneously. We're improving soil health, supporting biodiversity, and maintaining economic viability for farmers." Tom led them to where he had implemented companion planting, a technique where different crops are grown together to benefit each other. Tall sunflowers provided shade for delicate lettuce below, while marigolds planted throughout helped deter harmful insects naturally. "I was skeptical at first," Tom admitted, watching William examine a thriving row of vegetables. "It seemed too simple after years of relying on chemicals and machinery for everything, but the results speak for themselves." Catherine crouched down to observe a busy colony of beneficial insects working among the plants. "It's like watching a perfectly orchestrated ecosystem," she mused. "Every element has a purpose and supports the others." The morning progressed with hands-on activities that gave the royal couple a genuine appreciation for the complexity of modern farming. They helped plant winter cover crops, learning how these plants would protect and enrich the soil during the dormant season. William found himself genuinely fascinated by the precision required in sustainable farming. It wasn't just about avoiding chemicals, but about creating intricate systems that mimicked natural processes. As they worked, other farmers from the surrounding area began to arrive. Word had spread about the royal visit, but more importantly, They were curious about the sustainable practices being demonstrated. Margaret Davies, who ran a small organic farm nearby, brought samples of her heritage seed varieties to share. "These varieties have been grown in this region for centuries," Margaret explained, showing them thick, robust wheat stalks. "They're naturally resistant to many pests and diseases, and they produce grain with incredible nutritional value." Catherine was immediately drawn to the idea of preserving agricultural heritage. "There's something profound about maintaining these connections to our past while building toward a sustainable future," she reflected. The conversation turned to the challenges facing small-scale farmers who wanted to transition to sustainable methods. The initial investment in new equipment and the temporary reduction in yields during the transition period created significant financial barriers. "That's exactly why we're here," William said firmly. "We need to find ways to support farmers through this transition, not just talk about the importance of sustainability from a distance." They spent time discussing practical solutions, from government incentives to cooperative purchasing programs that would help farmers afford sustainable equipment. Catherine suggested connecting experienced sustainable farmers with those just beginning the transition, creating mentorship networks that could provide both technical knowledge and emotional support. As the afternoon wore on, they moved to a section of the farm dedicated to wildlife conservation. Hedgerows that had been replanted with native species created corridors for animals to move safely across the landscape. Beetle banks, uncultivated strips of land that provided habitat for beneficial insects, ran through the middle of crop fields. "The wildlife response has been incredible," Tom said, pointing to a red kite circling overhead. "We've seen species return that haven't been here for decades." William, who had been passionate about conservation since childhood, was visibly moved by the sight. "This is proof that agriculture and conservation don't have to be in conflict. They can actually support each other." They discovered bird boxes specifically designed for barn owls, whose presence helped control rodent populations naturally. Catherine spent several minutes photographing wildflower strips that not only supported pollinators, but also added natural beauty to the agricultural landscape. "Imagine if this became the standard rather than the exception," she said, surveying the harmonious blend of productivity and conservation surrounding them. The day concluded with a gathering in Tom's farmhouse, where local farmers, scientists, and community members shared a meal prepared entirely from ingredients grown on sustainable farms in the area. The conversation continued long into the evening, with William and Catherine listening more than they spoke, absorbing the real-world experiences and insights of those who work the land every day. Dr. Mitchell presented preliminary data showing improved soil health, increased biodiversity, and, crucially, maintained economic viability on farms that had adopted sustainable practices. The numbers were encouraging, but it was the enthusiasm and dedication of the farmers themselves that truly impressed the royal couple. "What we've seen today isn't just about farming techniques," Catherine reflected as the evening wound down. "It's about communities coming together to solve problems and create positive change." William nodded in agreement, already thinking about how they could scale up these efforts. "The knowledge and passion are here. We just need to create the right conditions for it to flourish." As they prepared to leave, Tom walked them back to their vehicle. The stars were beginning to appear in the clear country sky, and the sound of owls calling from the newly planted hedgerows provided a peaceful soundtrack to their departure. "Thank you for today," Tom said simply. "Having you here, really participating and learning alongside us, it means more than you know." Catherine smiled warmly. "Thank you for teaching us. This is just the beginning of something much bigger." As their car pulled away from the farm, both William and Catherine knew that their understanding of sustainable agriculture had been fundamentally changed. They had experienced firsthand the delicate balance required to maintain productive farms while nurturing the environment. More importantly, they had connected with the people who were making it happen, farmers who were willing to take risks and change their practices for the sake of future generations. The drive home was filled with animated discussion about next steps. They talked about organizing regional sustainable farming demonstrations, creating educational programs for agricultural colleges, and finding ways to connect consumers more directly with sustainable producers. People need to understand that sustainable farming isn't just an environmental issue, William said as they passed through small villages dotted with farms. It's about food security, rural communities, and preserving a way of life that has sustained us for centuries. Catherine was already envisioning ways to use their platform to highlight the stories of farmers who were pioneering sustainable practices. We need to celebrate these innovations and make sure they're shared widely, she said. Their first day of hands-on involvement in sustainable agriculture had exceeded all expectations. They had not only learned about farming techniques, but had also discovered a community of dedicated individuals working toward a common goal. The experience had planted seeds of inspiration that would soon grow into a comprehensive program touching communities across Britain and beyond. 3 months after their transformative day at Holcombe Estate, William and Catherine found themselves in the Scottish Highlands, where ancient forests met modern conservation challenges. The landscape before them told a story of both loss and hope. Vast areas where native Caledonian pine forests once thrived now stood empty, while nearby, carefully managed restoration projects showed what was possible when human intervention worked in harmony with natural processes. Their guide for this expedition was Dr. James MacLeod, a wildlife biologist who had spent 15 years studying the complex relationships between forest ecosystems and the animals that depended on them. Unlike their previous visit to the Norfolk farm, this journey would take them deep into wilderness areas where they would experience conservation work at its most challenging and rewarding. The Scottish Highlands represent one of Europe's last great wildernesses, Dr. MacLeod explained as they hiked along a mountain path, their breath visible in the cool morning air. But it's a wilderness that needs our help to truly flourish again. Catherine paused to examine a young pine tree that had been protected by a plastic guard. "These trees are so small now, but they'll outlive us all if given the chance," she observed, running her fingers along the protective barrier that kept deer from browsing the tender shoots. The deer overpopulation problem was one of the most complex issues facing highland conservation. Without natural predators, deer numbers had grown so large that they prevented forest regeneration by eating young trees before they could establish themselves. William listened intently as Dr. MacLeod explained the delicate balance required to manage wildlife populations humanely while allowing ecosystems to recover. "It's not about eliminating any species," Dr. MacLeod clarified as they observed a small herd of red deer in the distance. "It's about finding sustainable numbers that allow the entire ecosystem to thrive." Their first hands-on task involved planting native tree saplings in areas that had been prepared for restoration. William and Catherine worked alongside volunteers from local communities, learning the specific techniques required for highland reforestation. Each tree had to be planted at the correct depth, protected from deer, and positioned to maximize its chances of survival in the harsh mountain environment. "There's something deeply satisfying about planting trees," William reflected, carefully placing a rowan sapling in the prepared hole. "You're literally investing in a future you might never see." The work was physically demanding, requiring them to navigate steep, rocky terrain while carrying heavy equipment. Catherine found herself impressed by the dedication of the volunteers, many of whom traveled hours to participate in weekend planting sessions. "What motivates you to do this work?" she asked Sarah Campbell, a retired teacher who had been volunteering with the restoration project for 5 years. "I want my grandchildren to see what Scotland looked like before we cleared all the forests," Sarah replied. pausing in her digging to survey the mountainside. "Every tree we plant is a gift to the future." As they worked, Dr. McLeod explained how forest restoration created benefits far beyond just growing trees. Native forests provided habitat for countless species, helped prevent soil erosion, stored carbon to combat climate change, and supported rural economies through sustainable forestry and ecotourism. The group moved to an area where restoration efforts had been underway for a decade. The transformation was remarkable. What had once been bare hillside now supported a young forest teeming with life. Birds flitted between the branches, wildflowers dotted the forest floor, and the sound of running water indicated the return of natural stream patterns. "This is what success looks like," Dr. McLeod said proudly, pointing to evidence of natural regeneration where new trees were sprouting without human intervention. "We just gave nature a helping hand, and now it's taking care of itself." Catherine was particularly interested in a section of the forest where traditional Highland cattle were being used as conservation tools. These hardy, long-haired animals grazed in patterns that mimicked natural herbivore behavior, creating the mosaic of habitats that supported diverse wildlife communities. "They're like living lawnmowers," joked their handler, Duncan Ross, whose family had been raising Highland cattle for generations. "But they're much smarter about where and how they graze." William spent considerable time observing the cattle and learning about their role in the ecosystem. Unlike sheep, which grazed uniformly and close to the ground, the cattle selected certain plants while leaving others, creating the varied vegetation structure that different bird and insect species required. The afternoon brought an unexpected wildlife encounter that would stay with both William and Catherine for years to come. As they were checking tree guards in a remote valley, Dr. McLeod suddenly raised his hand for silence. In the distance, barely visible among the restored pine trees, a golden eagle had landed and was surveying its territory. "Golden eagles are one of our most important indicator species," Dr. McLeod whispered as they watched the magnificent bird through binoculars. "Their presence tells us the ecosystem is healthy enough to support apex predators." Catherine found herself mesmerized by the eagle's regal bearing and the way it seemed to embody the wild spirit of the Highlands. "There's something humbling about sharing space with such a powerful creature," she said quietly. The eagle's presence led to a discussion about the interconnectedness of conservation efforts. Healthy forests supported small mammals, which provided prey for birds of prey, which in turn helped control rodent populations that could damage trees. Every element of the ecosystem played a crucial role in supporting the others. Their next destination was a community-based conservation project in the nearby village of Glen Affric, where local residents had taken ownership of forest restoration efforts. The village had organized itself around conservation goals, with everyone from school children to elderly residents participating in tree planting, wildlife monitoring, and habitat management. "Conservation works best when it comes from the community itself," explained Mary Stewart, who had helped organize the village's efforts. "We're not just restoring the forest, we're rebuilding our connection to the land." William and Catherine joined a group of local school children who were learning about wildlife tracking. The children showed them how to identify different animal footprints in the mud beside a mountain stream, from the delicate marks left by pine martens to the larger prints of red deer. "Look, this one's really fresh," exclaimed 8-year-old Hamish, pointing to a set of otter prints near the water's edge. "My dad says the otters came back because the stream is cleaner now." The children's enthusiasm was infectious, and Catherine found herself crawling through the undergrowth to get a better view of a woodpecker's nest hole in an old pine tree. "These children are growing up with a completely different relationship to nature than previous generations," she observed. "They see conservation as normal, not as something special or unusual." The village had also developed innovative approaches to funding their conservation work. They operated a small eco-tourism business that brought visitors to see the restoration in progress, with all proceeds supporting further conservation efforts. Local craftspeople created products from sustainably harvested forest materials, providing income while demonstrating the economic value of healthy ecosystems. We've learned that conservation has to make economic sense if it's going to be sustainable long-term, Mary explained, as she showed them a workshop where woodcarvers created beautiful objects from fallen branches and thinned trees. William was particularly impressed by a project where teenagers were being trained as wildlife guides, learning both conservation science and business skills. "You're creating the next generation of conservation leaders," he told the group of young people who had gathered to meet them. The day concluded with an evening walk through the restored forest as the sun set behind the mountains. The sounds of the forest coming alive for the night, owls calling, bats hunting insects, and the rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth, created a symphony that spoke to the success of the restoration efforts. 5 years ago, this area was silent except for the wind, Dr. McLeod reflected as they paused beside a stream where salmon had recently returned to spawn. Now it's full of life again. Catherine sat on a fallen log beside the stream, listening to the water flow over rocks that had been carefully positioned to create pools and riffles that fish needed for breeding. "The complexity of it all is overwhelming," she said. "Every decision affects everything else." They were joined by several project volunteers who shared stories about the changes they had witnessed over the years. Tales of the first pine marten sighting in decades, the return of capercaillie to areas where they had been extinct, and the gradual increase in insect diversity that supported the entire food web. "The most rewarding part is seeing children from the village playing in forests that their parents helped plant," said volunteer coordinator Robert Fraser. "We're not just restoring ecosystems, we're restoring cultural connections that had been lost." As darkness fell and they made their way back to the village, William and Catherine reflected on the day's experiences. They had seen firsthand how conservation could bring communities together around shared goals, creating not just environmental benefits, but also social and economic ones. "What strikes me most is how positive everyone is," Catherine observed. "They're not just fighting against environmental destruction, they're actively creating something beautiful and valuable." William nodded, thinking about the parallels between the forest restoration and the sustainable farming they had witnessed in Norfolk. "There's a pattern here. When people feel empowered to take action and see tangible results, conservation becomes a source of hope rather than despair." The evening ended with a community gathering in the village hall, where local residents shared traditional Scottish music and stories about the land's history. William and Catherine learned about the cultural significance of the forests, how they had shaped Highland identity and traditions for centuries before their destruction during the clearances and industrial development. "Understanding the cultural dimension is crucial," reflected local historian Margaret Ross. "These forests aren't just collections of trees. They're part of who we are as Highland people." As William and Catherine prepared for the next phase of their conservation journey, they carried with them profound lessons about the power of community-driven conservation. They had witnessed how environmental restoration could strengthen social bonds, create economic opportunities, and reconnect people with their natural heritage. The Scottish Highlands had shown them that conservation was not just about protecting what remained, but about actively recreating what had been lost. More importantly, they had learned that successful conservation required the passionate involvement of local communities who saw themselves as stewards of the land rather than simply its users. Their experiences in Scotland would soon influence a major announcement about royal estate management and a new initiative to support community-based conservation projects across the United Kingdom. The seeds planted in the Highland forest were already beginning to grow into something much larger than anyone had imagined. 6 months after their Highland adventure, William and Catherine stood before an audience of farmers, conservationists, and government officials in the historic Great Hall at Hampton Court Palace. The ornate surroundings provided a striking contrast to the muddy fields and mountain forests where they had spent recent months, but their message was grounded in the practical experiences they had gained working alongside those who lived closest to the land. Today marks the launch of the Future Earth Initiative, William announced, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who had witnessed transformation firsthand. This is not another royal patronage or charitable endeavor. It is a working partnership between the Crown Estate and communities across Britain who are pioneering sustainable approaches to land management. Catherine stepped forward, holding a small potted oak sapling that had been grown from an acorn collected during their Highland visit. "This tree represents both our heritage and our responsibility to the future," she said, her words reaching beyond the formal audience to millions watching the live broadcast. "Every action we take today determines what world we leave for our children." The announcement they were making was unprecedented in its scope and personal investment. The royal couple had convinced the Crown Estate to commit over £50 million to supporting sustainable agriculture and wildlife conservation, but more significantly, they had pledged to personally oversee the implementation of pilot projects across royal lands. In the audience, Tom Bradshaw, the Norfolk farmer who had first introduced them to sustainable agriculture, sat alongside Dr. Sarah Mitchell and several other practitioners who had become their teachers and collaborators. Their presence symbolized the partnership approach that would define the initiative's work. "We are not experts telling people what to do," Catherine continued, gesturing toward the assembled practitioners. "We are students learning from those who have dedicated their lives to caring for the land, and we are using our platform to ensure their innovations reach the scale they deserve." The first major announcement was the transformation of Sandringham Estate into a showcase of sustainable practices. Working with Tom and other experienced farmers, they would convert the estate's agricultural operations to demonstrate how traditional farming could evolve to support both productivity and biodiversity. Dr. James MacLeod from the Scottish Highlands Project stepped onto the stage to outline the wildlife conservation component. "We will create wildlife corridors connecting fragmented habitats across multiple royal estates," he explained, using a large map to show how the initiative would link forests, wetlands, and grasslands to allow species to move freely across the landscape. The technical details of the plan were impressive, but what truly captured the audience's attention was the personal commitment being demonstrated. William and Catherine would spend 1 week each month working directly with project participants, learning new techniques and helping with practical implementation. "Leadership requires getting your hands dirty," William said with a smile that acknowledged how literally true this had become for them. "We cannot advocate for changes we are not willing to make ourselves." The months that followed the announcement brought a whirlwind of activity across royal estates and partner locations. At Sandringham, massive changes were underway as conventional crop fields were converted to regenerative systems. William found himself driving tractors and operating seed drills as the estate implemented cover cropping and reduced tillage practices. Catherine had taken particular interest in developing the estate's market garden, where heritage vegetables were being grown using companion planting and natural pest management. She spent hours with master gardener Elizabeth Hartwell, learning the intricate timing required to succession plant crops for continuous harvests throughout the growing season. "The difference in soil quality is remarkable," Catherine observed, comparing earth from the converted fields to samples from conventional agriculture nearby. "You can actually see how much more life there is in soil that's been managed sustainably." The market garden had become a testing ground for techniques that could be scaled to larger operations. They experimented with polyculture systems where multiple crops grew together, maximizing land use while providing natural pest control and soil improvement. Visitors from agricultural colleges regularly toured the facility, taking detailed notes on everything from planting schedules to harvest techniques. Meanwhile, the wildlife conservation work was creating dramatic changes across the highland estates. The Pine Forest Restoration Project had expanded to cover over 2,000 acres, with natural regeneration now occurring in areas where tree planting had created suitable conditions for seed dispersal. William had become proficient at wildlife monitoring techniques, regularly checking camera traps and conducting bird surveys to track the return of species to restored habitats. The data they were collecting would help guide conservation efforts across Scotland and beyond. "We documented the first pine marten den in this area for over 30 years, he announced excitedly during one of their monthly project visits. "It's in a tree that we planted during our first visit here." The community engagement aspect of the initiative had exceeded all expectations. Local schools had integrated the conservation projects into their curricula, with children regularly participating in tree planting, wildlife monitoring, and sustainable agriculture activities. The village of Glen Affric had become a model for community-based conservation that was being studied and replicated across rural Britain. Catherine had worked closely with teachers to develop educational materials that helped children understand the connections between healthy ecosystems and human well-being. Children who grow up understanding these relationships will make very different choices as adults, she reflected, while watching a group of 10-year-olds carefully transplant native wildflower seedlings. The economic impact of the initiative was also becoming clear. Sustainable farming practices were showing improved profitability as soil health increased and input costs decreased. The wildlife tourism associated with successful conservation projects was bringing new income to rural communities. Tom Bradshaw's farm had become a demonstration site that attracted visitors from around the world. His transition to sustainable practices had not only improved his environmental impact, but had also increased his profit margins significantly. "The royal support gave us credibility with banks and customers," Tom explained to a group of visiting farmers from Germany. "But the real transformation came from implementing practices that just make good economic sense." The initiative's influence extended far beyond royal estates. Government policy was shifting to provide greater support for sustainable agriculture, influenced by the practical demonstrations of what was possible. Agricultural colleges were updating their curricula to include regenerative farming techniques, and financial institutions were developing new loan products to support farmers through the transition to sustainable practices. International attention was also growing. William and Catherine had been invited to present their work at the United Nations Climate Conference, where their hands-on approach to conservation leadership had inspired similar initiatives in other countries. "We're not just talking about climate change and biodiversity loss," William told the international audience. "We're demonstrating practical solutions that work in the real world, implemented by people who understand their local conditions." The personal transformation experienced by William and Catherine was perhaps the most significant aspect of the entire initiative. Their deep engagement with land management had fundamentally changed their understanding of environmental issues and their role as future monarchs. Catherine had developed genuine expertise in sustainable horticulture and frequently consulted on garden design projects that incorporated conservation principles. Her weekend routine now included time spent in the Sandringham Market Garden, where she continued to experiment with new growing techniques. "There's something deeply grounding about working with soil and plants," she reflected during an interview about the initiative's second anniversary. "It connects you to natural cycles and reminds you that we're part of something much larger than ourselves." William's passion for wildlife conservation had evolved from a general interest to detailed technical knowledge. He could identify bird calls, track animal movements, and assess habitat quality with the skill of a professional biologist. "Conservation isn't sentimental," he explained during a documentary about the initiative. "It's about understanding complex systems and managing them sustainably. It requires scientific knowledge, practical skills, and long-term thinking. The third year of the initiative brought new challenges and opportunities. Climate change was creating unprecedented weather patterns that tested the resilience of both agricultural and conservation systems. The sustainable practices they had implemented proved remarkably adaptable, with diverse cropping systems and restored ecosystems showing greater stability than conventional monocultures. A severe drought that devastated conventional farms had minimal impact on Sandringham's regenerative systems, where improved soil structure and cover crops had enhanced water retention. The restored highland forests showed similar resilience, with diverse tree species and healthy soil systems maintaining ecosystem function even under stress. This is why biodiversity matters, Dr. McLeod explained while surveying forest plots that had weathered the drought successfully. Complex systems have built-in redundancy that helps them adapt to changing conditions. The initiative's success had attracted criticism from some quarters who questioned whether royal involvement in environmental issues was appropriate. William and Catherine addressed these concerns directly by emphasizing their role as facilitators rather than leaders. "We're not telling anyone what to do," Catherine explained during a public forum about the initiative. "We're providing resources and attention to support innovations that are already happening in communities across Britain." Their approach had consistently emphasized learning from practitioners rather than imposing solutions from above. The monthly working visits continued, with William and Catherine taking on increasingly complex tasks as their skills developed. By the 5th anniversary of the Future Earth Initiative, the results spoke for themselves. Over 10,000 acres of land had been converted to sustainable management practices. Wildlife populations had increased dramatically in restoration areas, with several species returning to regions where they had been absent for decades. The economic benefits were equally impressive. Participating farmers reported increased profitability and reduced risk, while conservation areas were generating significant income through sustainable tourism and ecosystem services. Perhaps most importantly, the initiative had demonstrated a new model for royal engagement with environmental issues. By combining personal commitment with practical action, William and Catherine had shown how traditional institutions could evolve to address contemporary challenges. The monarchy's role in the 21st century must include environmental stewardship, William reflected as he surveyed the transformed landscape at Sandringham. "We are temporary custodians of this land, responsible for passing it on in better condition than we found it." Catherine nodded in agreement, watching their children help plant trees in an area that would form part of a new wildlife corridor. "The most important thing we can teach the next generation is that caring for the environment isn't a burden or a sacrifice. It's a source of meaning and connection that enriches every aspect of life." As the sun set over fields where sustainable agriculture was producing abundant harvests while supporting thriving wildlife populations, William and Catherine reflected on how profoundly their lives had been changed by their commitment to hands-on conservation leadership. They had not only helped transform thousands of acres of land, but had also discovered a deeper purpose that would guide their future roles as monarchs. The Future Earth Initiative had become more than a conservation program. It was a demonstration that traditional institutions could adapt and lead in addressing the environmental challenges of the modern world. Through personal commitment, practical engagement, and genuine partnership with communities, they had created a model that was inspiring similar efforts around the globe. The legacy they were building would extend far beyond their own lifetimes, rooted in restored soils and growing forests that would continue to provide benefits for generations to come. Their hands-on approach had proven that effective environmental leadership required not just good intentions, but genuine understanding gained through direct experience with the land and the people who cared for it.